Hello, I'm Graham Fitch, coming to you from Steinway Hall in London for Pianist Magazine. This is the second in a series of 3 videos on practicing for a performance, what we have to do to take a piece from the early stages before we even start learning the notes to how we prepare right up to almost the day before the performance. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at deep learning practice techniques that we use as we're learning the notes. And I'm going to start off by talking about cue spots. Now, a cue spot is a section from a piece that we trip up when we get to it. Something happens, it's uncomfortable, it's inaccurate, it's uneven. In other words, not happy. So it could be just a couple of measures, or it could be a whole phrase, or maybe even a small section. We want to try and make it as compact as possible. Mark it in the score. I like to use a square bracket, but you can do whatever way you like. Some people use post-it notes, and then they write down observations, or even just put a little check mark when they played it through correctly. And the idea is that once you've got 3 or 4 or 5, however many times you want to do check marks in a row, you know you can immediately play when you've come to it from cold. Then you can sort of graduate from that cue spot. But let me give you a snippet from Mozart's Rondo alla Turca. Now, I want you to imagine that I'm a student and I stumble when I get to this point. Let me see, first of all, show you hopefully what it's supposed to sound like. Something along those lines. Now, the first thing I might do is to just take it right down to a slow tempo, and I call this the speed of no mistakes, meaning there's actually nothing wrong with mistakes in the learning. We have to make mistakes as we learn. But I'm talking about careless mistakes rather than honest mistakes. So in other words, if we notice, oh, my passage work isn't even, but it'll be all right tomorrow. That's what I call a kind of sloppy, careless attitude. What I'm going to do now is to play really slowly. You get the idea. That's quite slow, I think you would agree. I might want to do it a little firmer than piano to really sense every single note, every single atom and molecule of that passage. Really, really be secure with that. So perhaps mezzo piano, mezzo forte, that kind of an idea. Now, I'm ready now, I think. I've done that a couple of times. Before I leave it, and I am going to leave it because I'm going to come back to it in a moment, I'm going to do, I call this BBB plus 1, 1 bar plus 1 note, maybe a little faster. I've got an upbeat, so I'm going to include that in my first bar. And if I'm happy with that, which I was, then I can start on the note that I finished on and do the next measure. Perhaps I noticed there was a little tension in my arm there, so I would pay attention to that and ask my hand to loosen. Now, I may need to do some special technical work on this, but for the purposes of this demonstration, just bear with me. Let me go on now. Yes, happy with that. What I prefer to do is to take my hands away from the keyboard, put them on my lap, and then start again from fresh, as it were. And I enjoyed there the shaping of my right-hand phrase. I gave it a little bit of a contour. Don't forget that we need to enjoy what we're doing when we're practicing. It's not drudgery. It should never be drudgery. And so on until I reach the end of the segment. If I then want, I can go back and do 2 bars plus 1 note. You get the idea. So the satisfaction comes from the process and not from the product, the journey, not the destination at this stage. So remember that mice, we came up with this in the previous video. Mindful, imaginative, creative, enjoyable. Those are the qualities that we need when we practice. Now, it's really important to me, and most teachers I think would agree, that we organize a fingering that we eventually, quite soon, write down in our book, in our score. It may be the fingering that the editor has come up with. It may be a different fingering. We can research fingering possibilities on platforms like the Petrucci Library, IMSLP, have a look at various different editions, compare fingerings, try them out. Once you've decided, write the fingering down in the book and stick to it, because what we want to do is to develop our muscle memory. This is really important. Muscle memory is what enables us to play without really too much thinking. I don't have to think about where my hands are going to go because my muscles have been, I have trained my hands to go where I want them to go automatically. However, when we're deep learning, when we're engaged in mindful practice, muscle memory is a bit of a false friend because it can desert us when we're anxious, or when we're playing on a piano that's unfamiliar, or if we're distracted by something, maybe somebody's coughing, that sort of thing. You know, it can really disturb us. So we've got to remember, we've got the ear memory, developing the ear as we practice, and I'll show you some ideas for that. The mind, we've already talked about the analysis. So I have this term I call PPR, personalized pattern recognition. So my PPR radar is kind of always pinging when I'm practicing. Oh, I didn't notice that pattern before. I hadn't seen that both hands are playing the same note in different octaves at that moment. This sort of thing. You know, macro level, the big structure, and the micro level, the small structure. And then the muscle memory, I like to think of muscles last. So I aim to, or maybe at the same time, I aim to develop all three of those skills. So muscle memory, let me go back to the B-flat invention that I used in the first video and just show you some of the things that I would recommend doing. So the muscle memory will come from repetition, but each time we repeat, we aim to do it slightly differently. It could be the speed. It could be exaggerating the dynamics that I planned out. It could be exaggerating the articulation. If that's what I'm doing. Some different way of approaching when I do my repetitions. All of this is going to help me with my muscle memory because I'm focused on what I'm doing. By giving myself a new challenge, it means that I have to concentrate on what it is that I'm doing. Without the involvement of the mind in the practicing, we're not going to learn anything. So see if you can always be concentrating on what you do. Muscle memory, yes, we've talked about that, but I also want ear memory. So what would it be like if I tried to do this with one finger? And so on. Now, why am I doing this? Well, if I struggle to do that, perhaps it means that I haven't really heard the line in my inner ear. Perhaps I haven't really understood the design or the shapes of that I find on the page. So one finger practice is a brilliant way of testing out how well I know it other than muscles, because there's no muscle memory when I do it with one finger. So if I want, I could do one hand normal, and the other hand with one finger. I might do something like this. Let's say I take both hands to the music that the right hand has to play. And I just divide it up between the two hands. What am I doing? You may have noticed that I'm letting the left hand play the black notes and the right hand play the white notes. I could do that the other way around. I could do it in a kind of random way. Perhaps one beat with one hand, and the next beat with the other hand. That's a wonderful way of developing the ear memory and the brain memory, which will supplement the muscle memory. So we've got three systems working together. Another thing I can do is to transpose. So if I'm in the key of B flat major where I am, Bach is given. So if I go to, let's say, a semitone higher, B major. Now I'm going to do this kind of slowly, and I'm doing it by ear. I go into my subdominant here, chord 4. Maybe I could go into the semitone lower, half step lower, which would take me into A major, and so on. Now you may think, well, I haven't got time to do all this. Maybe you don't have time to do the whole piece. Perhaps you could just apply this to spots where you feel you need a bit more security, spots where you feel that you need a little bit more accuracy. It's incredibly revealing, this type of practice, and it's what I call musicianly practice. It's the sort of thing that musicians need to be able to do. We need to be able to use our ears. The opposite of just moving fingers across a keyboard. Now I'm going to come back to my Mozart example, because I'm going to do something else with that Q spot now. This is how you could practice. A little bit of this, do something else, come back to the Q spot. What I'm going to do now is to call out the harmonic labels as I block the left hand. Slow tempo. Chord 1, I'm in F sharp minor now. Dominant. Chord 5, tonic. Dominant, first inversion. Now there's my tonic chord, F sharp minor, but it's also chord 4 of the dominant. Now modulation into the dominant minor. I've got what's known as the cadential 6/4, chord 1 in the new key in its second inversion. Chord 5/7, chord 1 in its root position. So maybe following on from that, I'm going to play just my bass notes in the left hand. And if I do solfege, I might label these. Fa, sol. If I do movable do, that would be do, re. If I didn't do that, I could perhaps sing the bass notes. All of these things are possible. Now, I would work along those lines with the passage for a little bit, and then leave it and go on to something else, and then come back to it. I've got one more round of possibilities for you for that example. So I've got now the Maple Leaf Rag of Scott Joplin, the trio section in front of me. And I'm going to use a little bit of what I call the 3 S's, slowly, or speeds, a variety of different speeds, separately, which doesn't necessarily only mean hand separately, it can mean layers separately. I'll show you in a second. And then sections. The idea is that we divide the music up into bite-sized chunks for the purposes of chewing on them and then swallowing them before we take the next mouthful. So if this is how the piece will sound, that kind of an idea. Ragtime is wonderful to play. My slow practice might be this sort of speed, and I'm avoiding the pedal for the purposes of this practice. what do you notice? The tempo is slow, but the motions are fast. Look at how fast my left hand is preparing its positions. So as soon as I release this E flat octave, I'm dead center of my next position. I can practice my left hand by itself. Maybe just 2 bars at a time. Now, let's carry on with this idea of separately. I'm going to separate out my thumb notes. Maybe I'll play my left thumb notes. Against my right hand. Maybe I'll play my complete left hand and just the lower part. No, that's not correct. I hadn't really heard that, obviously. You get the idea. There's all sorts of things that we can do when we practice. We could practice using chaining techniques. So if I go to the next bar, just the first quaver. Maybe then I can add and practice one more quaver until I have a whole bar. And then I might want to start on the bar that I finished on. And you'll notice that my practice dynamic is light. Even though that might in the end want to be quite bright and strong, I would want to practice lightly in order that I minimize the vertical sensations involved in playing and maximize the horizontal ones, which lead to better feeling across the keyboard. Rather than down, I'm moving across. In the previous video, I showed you an example from Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse of a spot where I feel a boat gliding through the water, bar 67. So I'm able to really live this music because the way I have prepared it has been rigorous. So what I might do, if I'm practicing separately, I might practice the right hand. Sorry, let me start with the left hand. On a kind of loop. What I've got here is 2 groups of 5. 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if I wanted to repeat that on a loop, perhaps I could reorganize it rhythmically and thinking groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until I wind up with my strong beat on the pinky finger. That's one possibility. I could do some rhythmical work. I could do the same rhythm starting on the second note. And so on. I might even want to transpose that. Maybe on the next key. I'm not going to do it now because it'll take too long, but perhaps 2 or 3 different keys, so that this really becomes so comfortable and so free in my arm that I really don't have to think about it. Right hand, I've got a chord stream, 4 notes. I might want to just start off by playing the pinky finger line. The first violin, if you will. Maybe I'd do the same thing with my thumb, a little lighter. And so on. Maybe then, together, listening that the pinky finger is stronger than the thumb. How about the top 2 notes in my right hand? Top 3 notes. the bottom 3 notes. And if I'm going to play this piece from memory in the end, I would aim to do all these practice stages by memory also. What about playing the middle notes first? And then the outer notes. I meant that. Perhaps I could play the chord and then replay my bottom 2 notes. To lighten them up a little bit. All these things are what I call craftsmanship in practice, the enjoyment, the satisfaction that comes from the craft, rather than just simply basking in the phrase as I play. Let me just finish off with the Mozart example. This time I'm going to do some rhythm work on that spot. What sort of rhythms might I do? Well, I could do a dotted rhythm. Very traditional way of practicing. Maybe this rhythm. That's quite satisfying. What about this? Now, this is, I think, a more effective way of practicing in rhythms, and it's just contrasting 2 different tempos. So 1 bar at the full speed. And the next bar at half the speed. It could be a beat at 1 tempo and the next beat at the different speed. It could be 2 bars slow, followed by 2 bars fast. And I think what I'd do is I'd aim to exhaust as many possibilities as I could think of, and do them all as well as I possibly can do them, and then maybe come back to them later. What I've modeled for you in this video is what you could do in your own practice with a cue spot. In other words, a spot in one of your pieces that is giving you trouble. What you do is you spend a little bit of time on it with a particular activity, move to something else, come back to it with a different activity, and this is known as variable practice. And this is really helpful in preparing us for performance. So thank you all very much for watching. Do join me in the next video where I'll talk about the practicing a performance aspect of all of this. See you soon.